Yeah, I'm a part of the St. Luke's mission. I'm a missioner priest and sort of budding prior at the St. Luke's mission. And I've been in my city for about 15 years now with the wider church, and I've been with the Anglican Communion sort of in earnest since 2019 when I started on the corner of John Street and McNabb here in Hamilton, or sorry, at Macaulay. So, yeah, that's where I am.
Right.
The main piece that I want to share with you is sort of findings, more like phenomenological findings of what it means to pray in the desert. I think that there is probably a wealth of theology and long practice from the desert mothers and fathers, but I stumbled into that with this community through sort of practice of desert spirituality without realizing that's what we were doing. And so this morning, I want to sort of talk to you from sort of like a research and development sort of side of the coin, from my experience and our experience at the St. Luke's mission, and how we realized that the rhythms of prayer and the way that we were praying and the way that we were living started to resonate, started to seem like desert spirituality without us realizing that's what we were doing. One thing that since 2019, since the community has been meeting on this corner of John and Macaulay in the city of Hamilton, two things have come out of the site. One is the community of common prayer. And the community of common prayer exists as a community which seeks to learn to pray together. And it does this by meeting in the early hours of the morning for morning prayer throughout the week, and late hours of prayer in the evening. So evening prayer or compline. And this community started at the St. Luke's mission, which wasn't called the St. Luke's mission at the time. But it started there to learn the rhythms of morning and evening prayer. And so that is one thing, one community, one sort of green shoot that has grown out of the corner of this neighborhood block, the community of common prayer. We say it's a diverse, it's a bond of diverse Christian traditions learning to pray together. And the second thing that has grown out, the sort of second identifiable green shoot from this block, is what we call now the St. Luke's mission. And this is sort of the sort of Anglican expression of new monasticism growing out of both the St. Luke's mission is attempting to take some of the findings of the community of common prayer and make them a bit more accessible to people. It's sort of less hard knocks than the community of common prayer, which meets at pretty strict early hours and pretty strict late hours. So from these two things, I've been learning about what might the desert, what might that genius of the desert mothers and fathers have been. One of the sort of saints that we have been following as sort of a guide in this life of prayer together has been someone from the 2nd century, I believe, or the 3rd century, I believe, named Abba Arsenius. I don't know if you've heard that name before. But Abba Arsenius was a tutor in the Emperor Theodosius' court in the Roman Empire, and he prayed to God, saying, "God, lead me in the way of righteousness." And he heard this audible voice say, "Arsenius, flee, be silent, and pray." And so those three commands have been sort of a beat for the community. And we find it quite fascinating that the first one is flee. That's run. That's get up and go. Now is the time to flee. And I have found that essential in sort of an essential sort of awareness to have in sort of living under the cloak or the hood of the monastics who run to the desert. There's this urgency to move out to the wild waste, the silence, the place that is free of the clamor. And it's from that point that the command comes, be silent. So now into the desert, now be silent, be still. And it's from that stillness that you begin to pray, that you learn how to pray. And so for the community, if you give for the community of common prayer and the St. Luke's mission that have come out of this community, we see that we ask ourselves, how do we do these commands? What does it look like in our context in a city to do this? And so we've come to realize that our early mornings, we gather at 6:30 a.m. to pray morning prayer throughout the city from Monday to Friday. And not only now at St. Luke's, but other places, we call them branches of the community of common prayer. They're sort of like hubs. Think of them as sort of like desert outposts where people flee to at 6:30 a.m. in the morning. And they head out in often the darkness to meet with the community to pray together. We always begin, like most of us, we begin with silence. Silence is so important to us, and we talk about silence a lot. And we talk about the phenomenon of silence. We talk about what is happening when you have a group of people arrive in an early morning hour and they sit down, they come in as quietly as possible. They sit down and then they start to shut down. And you know this, like this isn't original to us, but I want you to think about what happens when a community gathers together and actively focuses on silence. So you're stilling the body, and you're stilling the mind, and you're stilling the heart, and you realize that there's a palpable silence. There's a gradient of silence almost that occurs as people do that. I'm sure you all understand it. We just talk about that a lot in the community of common prayer and at the St. Luke's mission. And we honor that because we realize it's very difficult to get onto the same page with one another. But the work of holding silence is our first bond of, is one of our first works of commonality. It's the thing we can actually do together. It involves just being silent. And then it's from there that we break the silence with a call to worship, usually a bell and the grace, right? The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you all evermore. And with your spirit, and also with you. Or at the community of common prayer, we often break it with a verse from Psalm 27. My heart says of the Lord, seek his face. And then the community will say together, your face, O Lord, I will seek. So, and that's how we begin prayer. So I want to stress this fact that we didn't think about the desert fathers and mothers and then apply their faith, their theology, their practice. We started to do these rhythms of early morning silence and prayer. And what we realized when we sort of took the film of Father Abba Arsenius as a foil, as like a lens, we put it on top of what we were doing. And we're like, oh, this is probably something that we should probably dig into this a little bit more. We've been sort of given this gift of desert spirituality that we didn't understand, and now we're starting to explore it from a more, from the literature, from the theology of it all. One thing I wanted to mention is, so we started doing this in 2019, and I think one of the I wanted to offer to you, and this is something I've been talking with a lot of people lately, is this story of Frank Herbert, the Dune series. Has anyone read those? Is anyone familiar with those? If I say the Dune novels, is anyone familiar with them? Or the movies? Okay. Well, check out the movies if you have time. I think they're really helpful for getting at this this concept of the desert. In the desert, the people who exist in this on the planet Dune, the first peoples there, the native people there, are called the Fremen, and they are incredibly in tune with the desert rhythms. And what that intunement looks like, it looks like attention. It looks like paying very close attention to how the desert works and what the desert has to offer. So when you flee, so in our contexts, when we flee the clatter and the clamor of the city and the empire, remember, I'm in the city. We're thinking about desert time and desert space in a city, not escaping it to a retreat center, but figuring out where the desert is in the city, right? So that takes attention, and it takes attention to place and things like time, to see that there are desolate places right in our city that we can inhabit in a sort of monastic fashion. So what I wanted to bring up about the Dune series is these Fremen, these first people of the Dune planet, these native people, are attuned with the desert because they have paid attention to it. Okay. That's a lot, and it may have been like drinking out of a fire hydrant, but I want to open it. I prefer to do presentations and talking with people interactively. I find it just works so much better to my character and my personality. So anyone have any questions? Anything that I said spark something in you? Anything that I said resonate with something you're doing in your own context?
Oh, I like the way your spirituality was not something you chased in, but it's something that you were doing and discovered what it was. And I resonate a bit with that conversation. That in some ways, we discover that the people have been doing what we've been doing before, and that then adds an extra depth to what we've been doing. I was wondering about. I just wanted to push in on this desolate space and the city, and the sense of how do you find, and I've found it myself, but perhaps a conversation we can perhaps have a bit about finding places of desolation within the city actually end up speaking to us. And certainly I found that my experience when we were in Derby, and perhaps Bev can chip in on that one, but certainly that sense of going into places which appear to be desolate and appear to be dead, and actually finding life within it. It was a bit like going into a place where we didn't expect to see life, but then discovering life there.
Thank you. Thanks, Simon. I guess to respond to that, Simon, if I might, I find that part of that seeking the desert in the place that you exist in, where you live, is about a hiddenness. So finding the places where you can hide out and disappear almost. So, for instance, I think of it not only places but time. In 6:30 a.m. or even earlier is early time. There's not much going on there, and so you have this sense of when you walk to a place, a chapel, a restaurant that's not open, but you're using it as a place of prayer. You are hidden in a great deal of ways. You're escaping. You are fleeing, I think.
I think the thing that struck me was what you were saying about you've got this, if you could say a bit more about, you seem to have two communities, like the community of prayer, and then you said you had a St. Luke's mission, and that you were kind of interpreting what you were doing with the common prayer, but making it more accessible. How are you doing that, and what is happening with that?
Yeah, that's a good question, and let me clarify that. I think the community of common prayer, when the bishop placed me at the old St. Luke's rectory and at the old St. Luke's parish church that had disbanded as a parish, I basically said, I think what we could start with morning prayer. I can gather some people and we'll learn the rhythms of prayer. And what we realized that as we did that, we were drawing more and more people at these ridiculous hours from a wide network that already was established. So what we identified was a sort of community, a fellowship, a traveling bond that did one thing. That was to try and learn how to pray together, and in the sort of very particular focused ways. What I mean by that is, like, we talk about like learning to anticipate when we chant the Psalms where we take a breath together, right? Learning the rhythms and the habits of each other so at such a fine-tuned level that we really honor the commonality, the oneness among us. And so where we do that, it's sort of like some people refer to the community of common prayer like a running club or like a gym club. You are part of a community, and you are working the liturgy, you're working the service together, and you're doing it over and over and over and over again, in the same words with the same patterns and habits to find your unity before God, basically, to be given that. And the St. Luke's mission is it is going to do much more. Its existence is to do much more than just learn to pray together, though that is a foundational piece, right? It has like a rule of life together, and it has different areas for folks to belong. So it's sort of going to, it holds, I would say, it carries some of the genetic traits of the community of common prayer, but it is also exploring different horizons and different borders, and it's much more of a dynamic thing where the community of common prayer is one thing. It does one thing. Does that help you, Beth? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, you find people who are part of that community of prayer are then wanting to do more because they've built up that community of prayer, and then like, well, what is that? How it's growing out of that, or is it?
Yes, exactly. So this community of common prayer, most people exist in their own communities, in their own churches, and they're very involved. But some from the community of common prayer have come around because they've deconstructed their faith right down to the bottom and are trying to build it back up again and figure out how it works again. And so a lot of those people, and some who have been with the community so long that they desire now to make this more accessible with the St. Luke's mission. The St. Luke's mission has very much come out of people who have been traveling with the community of common prayer and now want to make this more accessible to people.
Well, could you say a bit more about the teacher? Because you've talked about flee. I'm interested to hear you responding to the other key words of that.
Yeah. So flee, be silent, and pray. Pray always. That's actually the commands. And so that silence, and I touched a bit about this silence, but I think it's just it's exciting to me to, and this might be according to my personality, but to sharpen up our focus, and sort of approach some of these things with almost like a scientific mind, to data collect for the church and say, like, what is actually happening in the phenomenon of silence, especially when a community holds silence together. And so I touched on this a bit, but to reiterate, some of the things I talk about with the community is like when you grab a hold of that handle, the church door. And some of us, I think we do this as pastors, ministers, missioners who are fascinated with this life of prayer. But think about what you're doing as you cross the threshold of the sanctuary, right? As you enter in, already begin to make those movements of, I hate to use these technological metaphors of powering down and like for a human, but when you begin to still yourself, start that already at the door, so that by the time that you sit down, your whole presence is here, heart, mind, soul, body is settling. Yeah, I think that like in the mystical contemplative wings of the church, you do have this idea that God is in the darkness, in this deep darkness, right? So I think God is there in the silence too. So when we focus on that silence, when we put everything toward that silence together, we're preparing ourselves to worship and to pray together. So that's the silence piece. And the pray part, when we're together, is asking. We're we pray quite slowly in the community of common prayer and at St. Luke's, and the reason for that is to basically savor every word as we go, to be together, and when we're off track, because we're often off track together. Teaching how we come back to one another, teaching that there is space for laughter and, terrible singing and whatever, but we regroup together. We make that space and then we regroup. And so learning, it's really about attention on how to savor each word that is spoken together. And so that's what some of the things we talk about when we talk about prayer. That's why our liturgies don't change very often. They will honor the seasons, if we're celebrating a feast day or Lent right now, but we don't change much because we're the sort of, like, I would say, charism possibly of this community is to offer a sort of an attention, a development of the soul that I don't think is often talked about, like an exercising of the spirit. Remember, this is all like, I'm like a scientist right now, I'm saying, what do you think about this? Does this check out what with what you've been discovering?
I'm interested in what you're saying about being a scientist. So what have you observed about what those prayers have done for the individuals who come along, or what has it done for you as a community? What have you seen happen, or what have you measured?
Yeah, well, I've seen two things. I've seen some pretty remarkable just healing from a religious trauma, or we know it, like, people, some of the most grievous wounding is from the church, unfortunately, because it's so close to the truth that it really, really messes people, and it's very difficult for people to heal from that. And I've seen people in the slow, steady sort of repetition, but it's not like one of my friends has said, like, it's a demanding repetition. It's a demand, like, we demand this, but I've heard people say, like it's a run club where you're really working. You're putting it out on the line from 6:30 to 7 because it means it's very important work. And so we don't make any apologies for the intensity of it. But I've found that intensity holds people that just need they need that pressure to heal, to like wrap the wound. And the second thing I have seen is a deepen love and a pursuit of hiddenness and humility. So, like, what do I mean by that? Is I mean that, that, like, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, sort of thing of Christ. Now, that is in relationship to giving, but I also think that it's applicable in wider scope. I've just seen people love and explore what it looks like to hold things, bring things to not speak too quickly about something. Practice. One of my friends says, practice good secrets. I love that. And I feel like that is something that I've learned about the community of common prayer. I've seen people love to practice and explore what it looks like to practice good secrets. Yeah.
I've been in communication for a while with Richard Carter at the Nazareth community in St Martin in the Fields in London, in Trafalgar Square, right in the centre of Trafalgar Square, and they have an hour of silence as part of their rhythm of life, and people, and it's first thing in the morning again. I think I can't remember, it's something like 7 o'clock in the morning or something like that, or 6:30 in the morning they do it as well. So that sense of people rush and commute in London, and the noise and the hubbub of tube trains and bashing each other out of the way as you go through the centre of London, and then that sense of that silence of holding just a space within the noise, and just the space is really important to Richard and to his team and his community, which has emerged out of that. And certainly my own experience of sitting in silence in the midst of an inner city area is that contrast between the silence of what we create within ourselves and the noise that is still there outside the door, and that sense of creating that inner stillness whilst the world around you is still going at 100 miles an hour. I just wonder if you could say anything about that.
Sure. I think that's it's very sort of akin to what's happening on this corner of our city, John and Macaulay. And I think that so one of the things that I've wondered about the St. Luke's mission is what I call, and if anyone's got any like leads for me service wise, I've been wondering about like a peregrine, which a peregrine service, by which I mean from the Latin peregrinus, to travel, to pilgrimage. And so I've been wondering about a service that starts in one part of the city and ends at the altar with the Eucharist, right? And so, but it would be done, so it'd be processional, but it would be done at late hours. And it would be done it'd be simple, but it would be done from memory. So darkness, back alleys. And so thinking about, to your point, to your question, Simon, or this idea of what it looks like to do moving silence, right? To be with the community as it goes in silence in the silent places of the city, right? The hidden places of the city. So I think we can do that. I think we do that in a sitting posture, but we can also do that out in the open in a hidden sort of way.
Rob, I wonder if it would be good to talk about how this approach to desert. I'm just very aware that you suddenly have got lots of connections with people coming out of 12-step movements, addiction, who are really hungry. It'd be good to hear about how that connects with this desert spirituality. How is it helping you to be missional?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, well, there's the obvious answer about how it's, I think the obvious answer about how it's missional in terms of our, like this guy right here, this thing we pray to. This is a phone, by the way. So like the information technology is just brutal right now, and I don't need to beat that dead horse. But for someone who is coming out of a 12-step program, I think that so the very little exposure I have to this, but I'm starting to see, is that people are very who are coming out of the 12-step, for instance, are very program oriented, and they're like, give me the booklet, let's go. I want to learn this up and down. And so some of the stuff that I've been working with folks is let's cut back on some of that for a moment. Let's learn to be still, to stop. Let's get the booklet out. So we are working through sort of like Christian introduction to Christianity too, with some folks at the mission, along paired with this deep sort of apophatic forms of prayer, right? The silence and that. Do you want to?
No, I just wanted to make it so interesting that what you've started with a group of people just praying, not only deepening for people who are de-churched, dare I use that language, but that there's a hunger that people are searching and to you who are very unchurched,
Mhm.
who not just wounded by the church, but wounded by the world.
Yeah, I think that like the desire to allow people to enter into it fully. So the St. Luke's mission is also quite Anglo-Catholic in its expressions, but it's not doing that to pursue the Oxford movement. That's what I was saying. It's not doing that. It's mainly because it's so embodied that, we want I want to like I want to allow people to really try to worship in sincerity and truth, right? Do let the sincerity roll. And we're going to do that together. And what will happen? What will grow if we choose not to be sarcastic or ironic?
I was thinking as well myself that like there's something interesting about like to gather in silence means like the first voice people have a potential to hear before that call to worship is God's. And there's something I think really challenging to the powers you were talking about, even some of the objectively some of the pain and issue that the churches have caused over the years. But it's often because we insist to speak before God, and before we let God speak, and that kind of revelation, as you're talking about, even the way that the mission has then grown out of a place of prayer, feels like it's coming out because people are responding to God before institution, to God before theology, to God before whatever things that is. And I don't know if that's something that was something that kind of was in my head as you were talking about, that response to, to flee silence and then pray. And I was just wondering if that's something that might be, a part of that as well, or might be something that you've experienced or thought about.
Like I said, like, yeah, it just started to happen. Like it started to happen. And then through readings and sort of, there were just things that I was like, oh, what if we start understanding it in this way? And I want to walk amongst a community that is seeking to go deeper into the desert and go back, make this transit back and forth, right? A transit line, a sort of way marking. So we use, yeah. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I don't know if that answered your question, Timothy, but I just thought could I pull up a document? I wrote up some aphorisms basically that I think capture I wanted to bring this up, but let me just read these. They're very short. So I think these are the aphorisms. The St. Luke's mission is a station full of travelers. Not all of us are going in the same direction, but it is clear that all of us are going. The St. Luke's mission is a signpost. Some of us are led to the desert. Others of us are led from it. The St. Luke's mission is a party. For some of us are returning, and others of us are just about to depart. The St. Luke's mission is a new moon, that many of us be relieved of our sight, and many of us receive it. The St. Luke's mission is a spring that keeps us circling back on it, whether we like it or not. Yeah, so that's sort of what's happening on the corner of John and Macaulay. We're really exploring metaphor and language that talks about the life, the pilgrim life of the spiritual life as a pilgrim life, but a life that we go together with, and a life we share findings.
Get myself out. That's it. Can you hear me? Yeah, good. Yeah, it's just more some thoughts that I'm having on this seeking it, what we use the phrase seeking of the desert of silence in a city context. And I think potentially what I've found in doing this for how many years now, Ian? 3, is that there's an awful lot more desert than I saw, and by sitting and listening in the silence, for whatever reason, and I'm not going to go into this, the theology or psychology or anything else of it. The desert becomes more visible. So what I guess is the traditional understanding of the desert: you leave the city and disappear, and go out into something where there is nothing, and that's exactly what's going on in the city around me, and I'm beginning to see more. So it's a good example of desert in the city on Friday night. It's the second to last day of the last week of the night shelter for homeless people, and the desert wasn't in the place; it was in the people who carried that with them. It's as if they walked through our door and brought the desert with them. I think there's an understanding, and I think, I think I've come to understand that there's so much hidden in plain sight, and that we don't see it, and that this practice therefore can help us to be more open to what we see when we then leave and go out into the world.
Thanks, Phil. Appreciate that. Desert as located in people. That's what I heard.
I'm going to have to really get my head around this, because it's sort of coming from a different way. But what I've sort of picked up is sort of a desert alone, or a desert as a group, which sounds really exciting to me. I'm very much on my own when I get into a desert place. I belong to a church where, try as you may, they will not be silent before we're waiting for. And there's 2 or 3 of us that are trying to say, we really want that time of silence before, to just sit and wait. I don't know how to actually be able to manage that. This is within a sort of a small church setting.
Yeah. That's yeah. Go ahead, Pat. Sorry to interrupt you.
So this is quite interesting. I've put lots of things, the idea of sort of finding the desert. It's a new concept for me, the desert. So I should work on that with a few others, hopefully.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Pat. Those are hard habits to break when we, when people are used to just chatting, catching up before service. That's how it has been, and that's how it will be in ways. We had I think one of the things, we started that way at 6:30, and I just said, hey, I know that we come from places where we gather and we have our coffee. Here, you're going to come in, grab your coffee, and you're going to shut up. Like, we're going to be utterly still. We're not going to talk. We're going to be still too.
Yeah.
And that's for this reason.
And I belong to a community as well. And it's something to play with in both church and community.
Yes. Yeah. Well, thanks, Pat.
Thank you.
Rob, if people are interested in exploring this desert spirituality, given that it's slightly overwhelming to try and find how you enter into that in terms of book resources and others, what sort of things have you used that's opened it up for you?
I don't know. I don't think it's very accessible, but there's the Philokalia, which is a 3-part Orthodox. I don't know. Well, I think what I would say is it's actually, if you want to do this, go with a different posture of slow, and attempt, look at the small, minute changes, and make those changes over a long period of time. So with the attention, don't think big picture, but think just small changes. Think about being like hooded and looking at your feet, and you need to travel at that pace. You're not looking up, but you're looking at the light. You are a light into my feet. So think about how fast you need to go if you're hooded and only see your feet. Go that pace.
Okay. Well, Rob, thank you for your time. Thank you for what you said. Maybe I just summarize what I think I heard. I think that's what Simon's asked me to do. So I hear a lot about how the desert and that silence is very countercultural. I hear that, as you say, that this is incredibly important in a culture where we're completely driven by information technology and how that can become oppressive. And I heard a lot about how desert spirituality and silence and darkness as an expression of that helps to kind of almost get beyond everything to start a process of healing and restoration for those who are struggling with carrying wounds from church and also from people carrying wounds from the world. And I hear that what you've done, what I love about that is that you started with prayer and all this stuff has just emerged out of that. And I hear the story that you're telling about a God that honors those spaces and deepens it and does things beyond anything that we could actually perceive at the beginning. So I hear lots of about that whole thing about pilgrimage. You use that language a lot about wandering and what does it mean to be a community attending to that desert and attending to each other in a much deeper way than we often do. And I'm hearing that you're challenging us to be much more intentional and slow in the things that we do. So thank you, Rob. That's been incredibly helpful. And thank you for all that you've done. Do you want to say something about what you're about to go and do? It'd be interesting for people to hear what you do for your other job as well as.
Yeah, my other part-time gig is at a cafe called 541 Eatery and Exchange, and it's a social enterprise here in the city. I've been with 541 for the last 6 years or so, and it's eatery and exchange, meaning we serve food here and we do lunches and breakfast, but we are a place of exchange. So we one of our main goals is to guard a place of where hospitality can occur. So hospitality being the love of the stranger. And so we serve folks from all different walks of life, many different stories, but there's lots of our patrons struggle with addiction, homelessness, mental health. So that's where I'm about to go back to right now.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thanks for the opportunity to think through these things and process them. Bless you. Peace.